Welcome to the Real Estate Syndication Show. Whether you are a seasoned investor or building a new real estate business, this is the show for you. Whitney Sewell talks to top experts in the business. Our goal is to help you master real estate syndication. And now your host, Whitney Sewell.
This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today, our guest is Bill Ham. Thanks for being on the show, Bill.
Hey, thanks, Whitney. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, over the last 15 years, Bill has created a large portfolio of multifamily assets. His first 400 units were all bought with creative financing. He has written a book on creative cash to share those techniques with us today. Yeah, the book's called Creative Cash. Is that right, Bill?
Correct. That's the name of the book, Creative Cash.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more about the book, but I want you to, I want us to be able to dive into obviously some creative financing techniques that maybe you share in the book or some ways that you can help the listeners think outside the box a little bit, right? I mean, it's a big part of this business is being creative and being able to make a deal work, and hopefully it's conservative still, all those things, right? But there's so many different ways to make it happen. Give us a little more about who you are, Bill, maybe your background, your focus right now, and let's jump into some of the creative financing things that we should be thinking about that you're going to help the listeners with.
Absolutely. So I've been in real estate for 16 years. I started in houses, flipping single families. My very, very first deal was a duplex. I was a pilot by trade, backing all the way up. I was flying airplanes. I started studying real estate in 04, 03, 04, closed my first deal in 05, which was a duplex. I had saved up $10,000 and the duplex was cash flowing $300. And that's what I walked away from my aviation career with. I just went into real estate full time, for better or for worse, and started flipping houses for a few years and then got into multifamily and then started growing my multifamily portfolio larger and larger, started off with some small ones and got bigger and bigger. Did my first 400 units with some form of creative financing. And my first syndicated deal was 152 units, but I actually got seller financing on the deal. So quick background on that. My partner and I went in and we had to put down 25%, north of 75% loan to value. And the 25% allowed this seller to clear their debt. They had a Fannie Mae mortgage, I believe. And so they didn't have much of it left. They owned it for a long time. We were able to clear that primary loan. They then originated a 2-year seller financing with my partner and I. We brought on our limited partner investors and sort of combined a syndication with seller financing or syndicated a seller financing deal. And so that was my first foray into larger commercial assets, and I've been here ever since.
Nice. Would you go into the detail or just a little more about that as far as, I know you said you syndicated that deal, so you have investors on that deal or limited partners, but then there's also a dynamic of this seller financing. Could you explain a little more of the details there? Was there any issues with the limited partners or, anybody have concerns about that, or how did that work a little bit?
Yeah, it was the backstory of how we actually got into that deal. My partner and I got into that deal was that the seller had a problem. And that's one of my big focuses. And that's one of my big subjects in the book is how to look at deals and how to analyze deals in very specific ways so that you see what other people don't see. And it's by using this lens of creativity that we can look at a deal, dissect the seller, and say, what's really the motivation here? What's going on? And can we create an offer that is a problem-solving offer? And that's the number one way we're going to get creative financing is when a seller has an issue that we can come in and solve. Well, this particular deal, the seller had leased out too many of the units to this one sort of facility that was a behavioral facility and leased out a bunch of units from the property and put some of their patients in there. And so what happened was all the lenders didn't like that. And they said, you have what's called a concentrated economic driver. And they said, you've got too much concentration to this one company. I think we were at something absurd, like 22%, and Fannie and Freddie will get itchy after about 10%. We were way over that. And so debt was really hard to come by. We were also in sort of a post-recession market in middle Georgia. That area hadn't really recovered as far as values and attention to real estate. So there was a lot of aspects that made the deal hairy, if you want to call it that. So the seller was having trouble getting anybody to actually close the deal. And that's when I came in, saw the issue, saw that the real estate was actually good real estate and the numbers worked and the business was solid, it was the seller that actually had the issue, and I could create a solution for that seller. And that's basically how we got into the deal.
And then mention again what you did there. I know, what did the seller finance? What part of the deal, was the seller financing? How did you make that work for both of you so the seller was
Right.
on board with that?
Yeah, it's what I really talk a lot about in the book, and I teach a lot of my students, is to give on price and take on terms. So when you're going into a creative deal, whether it's a master lease option or seller financing or any of the types of creative financings that I teach and share in the book, it's about really understanding that the seller is probably going to be more sensitive about price, but not nearly as sensitive about the terms, such as interest rate, maybe down payment, interest only window, things of this nature. So this deal basically broke down to 75% loan to value. We had to put down 25%. But what we did was to be able to go in there and defer a certain amount of those first payments. They accrued to the back end, but we didn't actually have to straddle the property with debt from the cash flow. So we were able to defer, I believe it was like 6 months worth of payments in the beginning. So we were, had a lot of cash flow that we were able to go in and use that money to then stabilize and turn around the operations as we lowered the tenant base. So we basically literally had to get rid of cash paying tenants, which you go figure, right? But that's what we had to do, and so we did that, and we released those units to regular street tenants, normal market rate tenants. And at that point in time, within the 2-year window, we'd stabilize the asset. We were able to refinance into a long-term Fannie Mae loan, and ever happy ever after, basically.
Good deal. So ultimately he needed the 25% down to get out of his debt, like you were talking about.
Correct.
But then he financed the deal for you as the seller.
Correct.
But your terms is what helped you a lot, because you said, okay, I'll pay this price, because that's what he's stuck on. Just like you said, so many sellers, like they like that number, right? They like
Correct.
that number. However, there's other ways to make it better for yourself. And it sounds
Absolutely.
like you made that happen. Are there, what other examples or how else, would you help the listener think through right now some creative financing options or to creative cash options, right?
Sure. Yeah.
That maybe we wouldn't normally think of, that you've seen people,
Mm-hmm.
take deals down with.
Yeah, there's lots of techniques out there and lots of ways to combine certain techniques. The two major ones, and the ones that I cover the most, are seller financing and master lease options. If you're in the single family market, it's just a lease option. We call it master lease option when you start covering multiple units at one point in time. Those are two of my favorite techniques. They have not had a lot of traction and not a lot of use over the last 5 or 6 years, simply because sellers have not had that many problems. If a seller had a problem, they could probably just take that property, put it on the market. They're going to get asking price. We all know over the last year or two, they're probably going to get more than asking price. So that tide has kind of floated all of those problem boats. Well, what I'm predicting is that we're at the top of a market cycle. We're going to go down here soon. Maybe not a crash. I don't believe we're headed into a full meltdown, so to speak, but I do believe we're going to have a pullback. One of the big areas we're going to have a pullback in is debt. And we're already seeing that. All right. So we're seeing lenders starting to tighten up. We're seeing Fannie and Freddie at this point in time making us have the 1 year's worth of principal, interest, taxes, insurance. Now, this is difficult, and it's making deals much harder to fund. That's where we're going to see the advent of creative financing. And so I'm predicting over the next year to 2 years is where this subject is going to become very popular because it's going to be how you're going to have to deal with a distressed asset or a value add asset when those lenders may not be there to fund it. And I always kind of make the joke on when the market's going up, we call a distressed asset or something that needs work or renovation, we call that value add. But when the market's on the other side, we call it a distressed asset. It's the same property. It's the same repairs, right? We have a nice name for it and then a bad name for it. Well, we're going into the distressed asset market. And that term comes about because it's lenders. They will start labeling these as distressed assets and no longer value add. And that's the excuse they'll give you for not funding or for giving you very low loan to value. So that's what we'll use creative financing for. Now, a specific technique for your listeners, one of the big techniques that I use is what I call the SPY technique. And this is something that I created, and SPY stands for Seller Property U. And that is the order in which you're going to want to analyze a deal. most people make a mistake. The biggest mistake that those people make when kind of analyzing and looking at creative financing is to sit down and decide what is good for them, the buyer or the investor. What's good for me? Then I'm going to look at the property and I'm going to say, okay, maybe there's something wrong with the property. And then lastly, I'm going to think of the seller. That's a mistake. You got to reverse the order. And that's why I created the acronym SPIES, to remind you, start with the seller and the seller's problems. Make sure your offer solves that part. Then move to the property and see what the property wants. All right, now craft your offer to create something that may solve the deferred maintenance, low occupancy, the list can go on and on. Okay, and then lastly, the offer needs to solve your problems, and you are the least important in the equation. And that's the biggest tip I think I can give listeners is follow that technique, and you will increase the probability of getting deals done through creative financing tenfold easy.
Okay, no, great information. And let's talk about those two options there just a little more detail, the seller financing, master lease option. So on the seller financing, and obviously I like the SPY technique. You're talking about seller property and really thinking through, it's going to help you to craft your offer, craft your deal. And let's talk about that a little bit on the seller financing. Tell us any techniques about approaching that conversation with the seller. I know that can be intimidating at first, right? How do I approach them?
Yeah.
Not seem needy, but it also, it's solving a problem for them also, right? But give us some techniques about that.
Yeah, sure. I would even broaden the scope up to include realtors, because a lot of our deals, especially in the commercial space, especially in larger multifamily properties, are all going to come from realtors. So we can't exclude that aspect of it. And I go through an entire chapter on just how to work with realtors. But so it's how do we make offers to realtors, which is slightly different than how do we make an offer if we're talking directly to a seller. So to answer your question specifically, I would say if you're talking directly to a seller, make one offer at a time. That's a big mistake I see people make, is they sit down and they say, oh, and I've seen people even teach this, and it's a terrible technique. I'm going to come up with 3 offers. Here's a cash offer, and then that's really low. And then here's a seller financing offer. And then here's maybe a bank offer. And here's all 3 offers, and I'm going to put them all on the table. You choose one. Okay. First of all, that's terrible negotiation technique. Number one. Number two, you're likely to give the seller choice fatigue. They got too many choices. They don't know. So don't do that. If you're working with a seller, if you're working with anybody, a realtor, anybody, basically, when you go to make an offer, take the offer that is the best offer for you, submit that offer. If they don't like that or they negotiate parts of that offer, then you begrudgingly fall back to that second offer. And then lastly, you fall back to the third offer. Never lay all 3 offers on the table at once, because then what if they just look at you and say no? Where are you going from there? Now you've put all your cards on the table. They just went, now you got to do better. Now you're going to be negotiating against yourself. One offer at a time. That's really, really important. I see a lot of people make that mistake. If you're working with a realtor, then my tip to broach the conversation, number one, two points. Number one, never ask for seller financing or creative financing. It's always ask the question, how do you find a creative financing deal? You don't go around asking realtors for seller financing deals or creative financing deals, because you look like you have no money and you can't close, and realtors are not going to appreciate that. So you just look at deals. You just analyze deals like you do any day of the week. If a deal doesn't work for whatever reason, then we pull it out and say, okay, do we have any creative financing tricks that'll fix this? If the answer is yes, a lease option or seller financing or something like that will fix it. Then you go to the realtor and you say, okay, listen, we have a problem. And that's where you kind of explain to the realtor the situation. Maybe it's a low debt service ratio. That's a common one, things like that. For whatever reason, we can't go over to the bank and get a traditional loan. So you have a problem, realtor, your seller has a problem. And here's the offer that I believe will solve that problem. What do you think? You always end it with that one. Never just haul off and submit a creative offer to the realtor, because I always tell people that you can get the messenger killed. Remember, a realtor has a fiduciary responsibility to turn your offer in. They have no responsibility to recommend the offer, right? So you need this realtor to recommend the offer to be your champion with it. So best thing to do there is to get the realtor's buy-in on helping you create the offer. So that's why I always kind of end it with, hey, what do you think about this? And then really get that realtor on board. So those are my tips for the two sellers and realtors. Yep.
Yeah, no doubt about it. You need that broker or realtor to like you in your offer, right? Like you said, they do have to show it, but they don't have to recommend it
Oh,
or even speak highly of it, right? And so,
no.
but you know, on the seller financing, like how you mentioned, some great points there. You mentioned like choice fatigue. I don't know if I've heard it
Yeah,
called that before, but great. And never laying all your offers on the table at one time,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's so
Decision
smart.
fatigue, choice
Yeah,
fatigue,
decision fatigue. Yeah, choice
decision
fatigue.
fatigue. Yeah, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And never ask the realtor for seller financing deals. And it is, you know, what does that tell them? Well, most of the time it's going to tell them that you don't have the capital or you can't, you know, they're going to think you can't close potentially, or you're not, you know, they're top on their list as somebody that can close. But I wanted to
Correct.
also get into the master lease option a little bit. It's something that we haven't talked about much on the show because I feel like you said, it's something that people were trying to do a few years back, more so, or you know, quite a few years ago, but not so much lately. And maybe there are, and we just don't hear about it as
There's
much. But
not a lot of material out there. But besides the book that I'm putting out now, there is not a ton of places that you can go and get creative financing education. So
yeah,
hopefully,
I've only
hopefully
heard
this
of like
will.
one mentor who pushes this
Yeah,
method,
right.
you
Exactly.
know,
There's not much
or
out there.
coach, you know, in this industry that kind of pushes this method. But in case the listeners never heard of that option, I'd like for them to at least be aware of it. So, you know,
Sure.
hey, maybe this is something I could use here, and then they can do more research. But what is that? Could you just lay out
Yeah,
maybe an example?
sure. 10,000-foot view. Basically, a master lease option is two contracts, two separate contracts. One gives us the right to rent the property. One gives us the ability to rent the property with the right to sublet to tenants. So basically, Whitney, if you've got a 100-unit apartment complex, I'm going to rent that complex from you with the right to lease the units out to other tenants. So that basically functionally makes me the owner in charge, so to speak, but it's still in your name. Then the separate contract is our option to purchase. And what I'm going to do with that contract is to set a price that you and I agree on today. And then you and I are going to agree on an amount of time, the option period in which I have to actually purchase the property. So what I've done now is I've controlled the operations of the property with my lease, and that also controls the cash flow. Okay. And then I've controlled the future sale of the property with my option to purchase. So the idea is that you would want to kind of get something that can be renovated or the value can be brought up. So let's say you and I agree on a option price of $1 million, and I have 3 years in which to purchase the property for $1 million. Well, hopefully I can get the value of the property well over $1 million within those 3 years, and then execute a purchase, and I'm buying it back at that $1 million. So that's kind of the idea, with doing a lease option. But the seller really kind of has to have some sort of motivation to do it. So again, remember, if somebody can just haul off and sell that property, if it's cash flow and if it's pretty, if it's making money, probably not the strongest scenario for creative financing.
They are going to have to be motivated some way, right? And then I know some people say, well, it's beneficial to them because I'm going to improve the property and I'm going to raise the rents and NOI, all those things. So it's going to be more valuable. So even if I can't purchase it, they're getting a better deal. But somehow you have to show them you can perform, I think, right? I mean, like, why would they do this with you unless they are just, on their last straw, needing help?
That's actually a great syndication question in general, because I teach syndication and I have a lot of students and I do a lot of them myself. And it's the number one objection when any person is new to real estate, especially new to syndicating a deal. Why should I do this with you? You've never done it before. And that's a broad objection that covers, like I said, almost raising money in any aspect. Education. That's the only answer I can give you is education leads to experience. If a limited partner or a seller or someone you're trying to do business with comes to you and says, you've never done this before, why you had two things: look them right in the eye and say, you know what, you're right. I've never done this before. I do not suggest you try and fake it till you make it. It's very easy to catch people faking things in this business. So the best thing you can do is just be brutally honest and say, you're absolutely right. I'm a complete amateur. But that's where you better be able to speak about your education, your mentors, your program that you're signed up with, whoever you're working with, team, exactly. And that's where you need to shift that conversation over to your education, because I always ask the question, look, if you have no experience and no education in the business, why should they do business with you? They should.
That's right.
And they won't.
Yeah,
Nobody, no sane person would anyway, right?
That's right. What about just on this for another few seconds here, the
Sure.
master lease option? How many attorneys are going to be familiar with that option or
Great
experience?
question. Some, but not most. And that is a part of the book I really talk about, is how to go out and find attorneys that have experience. Because if you get an inexperienced attorney, and I mean not inexperienced, but just inexperienced in lease options, they're probably likely to start telling you it can't be done. And they're going to throw up more
Right.
roadblocks than they're worth. I've seen attorneys probably kill more deals than I can count. And I love my attorneys, don't get me wrong, but they will kill a deal something quick. So you just got to get the right
especially, I
attorney.
mean, it's just like hiring the brain surgeon for your knee operation, right? I mean,
That's right.
they have specialties, right? For a reason. No, that's great. Well, Bill, what's been the hardest part of the syndication business for you?
Building a network, I think, has probably been one of the biggest aspects. And it's one of the main reasons that I got into teaching early on. I love teaching. I love real estate. But I learned early on that teaching, coaching gave me a way to kind of network one to many. And so I think building a network of investors has probably been one of the biggest struggles. It just takes a lot of repetition, a lot of follow up, a lot of exposure, a lot of content creation if you're going to go out there on the web, so doing things like you're doing, bringing content with podcasts and things of the nature. And I'm not very good at social media. So between building a network and not being great at social media, those are probably two of my largest challenges.
Is there a way that you overcame that, whether the networking
Yes,
piece, social media?
Yeah, hire really smart people and get out of their way. That's what I've done largely, is just work with really intelligent people and be a good leader. Not try and wear all the hats. It's going to cost you money. It's an investment. You got to understand you're going to spend money on these things, but that's about all. I'm now the CEO of Broadwell Property Group, so I've partnered up with somebody here. And really surrounding yourself with a great team and great people is the biggest thing I can tell you to do.
How do you prepare for another downturn? As an operator, or maybe as you're advising clients as well. How do you prepare for downturn?
Yeah, I think now, especially in the syndication aspect, now is the time to really be doubling down on relationships. We know that at the moment deals are a little bit hard to come by. Prices have been a little bit elevated. I believe that that's going to shift. I also believe that's going to shift heavily in the C space going forward. And so what I suggest is that if you're struggling to find deals right now, really focus a lot of your time and energy on networking and team building. Get out there and really build that database of investors and spend a lot of time doing that right now. Therefore, when the market does hit the bottom or a heavy downturn and it's time to buy, you don't lose momentum and market cycle ramping up your team, because it can take you a year or two to get together a good group of LPs and general partners. In a year or two of missing a market can really put you into a whole other market cycle. So I say really focus on investor relationships right now.
It doesn't happen overnight, that's for sure. Yeah,
No,
1 to 2 years. I think that's a good ballpark. What about any predictions for the next 6 to 12 months in the real estate market? And are you all buying, selling? What's your plan?
We're looking to buy, but I have our company's having a flight to quality. So I am predicting, number one, for us at Broadwell Property Group, we're really looking to syndicate better assets, B plus type assets for right now, with a longer term hold window. Not really trying to do a lot of heavy value add, not trying to do a lot of deals that the going in cap rate is very low. But the only way to decompress the cap rate is by just raising the rent. I see that model a little too much lately. So my predictions going forward over the next year would be careful about aging assets. It's something I talk a lot about. It's what I call the CapEx tsunami. I believe that we have some failing infrastructure in a lot of older buildings. So my prediction over the next 2 or 3 years is be careful about 60s and 70s built products because the prices are too high and the infrastructure may cost you a lot. Be careful about over renovating assets right now. If you're looking at a rent raise model, what I would suggest over the next year to year and a half is just if you believe the rents are truly below market, just try and raise the rents organically. Don't renovate the unit right now. Because what I have found from 15 years of operation in several market cycles is that when we're in a downturn, tenants find more value in the affordability of the unit than granite countertops and Moen faucets and whatever. So I think you may not want to over renovate units right now because you might not quite get that rent bump you're looking for. So that's from an operator. Those are my tips at the moment.
Awesome. Well, Bill, do you have any daily habits that you are disciplined about that have helped you achieve success?
Yeah, I do actually. I read a lot, number one, but 2 cups of coffee in the Wall Street Journal every morning, guaranteed, every single morning. And I split it. I read only half the paper on Saturday, so I can save the other half for Sunday. But 2 cups of coffee in the Wall Street Journal every single morning. It keeps you abreast of all kind of market trends and global trends and things that are going on. And if you're a syndicator, if you're out raising money and you're working with investors, you always want to be able to have a conversation besides the weather. I hate it when two people get together and they have nothing to talk about but the blasted weather. Read the newspaper. There's so many things you can discuss. I can talk to almost anybody and have some kind of global conversation because I read the paper, in the Wall Street Journal specifically. So yeah, that's helped me out tremendously. 2 cups of coffee and Wall Street Journal every morning.
What's your best source for meeting new investors right now?
Well, that's a tough one. Probably doing things like this, actually, being on podcasts, going out and trying to create content. It's one of the reasons that I wrote the book, besides giving back and teaching. Books are not giant money makers by any stretch of the imagination, but I always joke they're 200-page business cards. So I would say content creation is probably one of the best things that you can do right now, as far as networking and get your name out there, especially since we've kind of in this late stages of the COVID thing here, and still people are not having a lot of social events in person. I think content creation is your best bet right now.
What's the number one thing that's contributed to your success?
Creativity. Yeah, learning how to solve problems, problem solving. Yep. It's good to start off with money. It's better to start off broke. If you start off with nothing, you only got one way to go, and all you can do is use your brain to solve problems. And that's where I started with. I started with nothing, and I had quit the job, no experience, no money, so I really had no choice. It was figure it out or go home. And I think that gave me the sense of creativity to do what I do now. But solve problems.
There's skill sets that are learned that way that just help you through the rest of your life. Especially
Correct.
in your business, right?
Yeah.
How do you like to give back?
I teach, up until COVID was locked down, I was doing a 1-month meetup group every month where I go in and give about an hour and a half lecture to anybody who would come and listen. I've written for other RIA groups in the past. Teaching, I love teaching, doing things just like we're doing right here, right now, just sort of giving back to the education. When somebody asks a question, I'm always willing to give them 100% of my answer. Without any sort of sales pitch or hook. I'll answer any question that anybody has as honestly as I can.
Awesome. Bill, it's been a pleasure to get to know you a little better.
Yeah,
I know
thanks.
we've met at conferences in the past and whatnot, but great to get to know your story a little better and your skill set, and which is a great one, by the way, to have. You definitely hone these skills, and now you're helping a lot of other people do the same, because we need to have these things in our tool belt, right? And understand
Absolutely.
some different options that may be available to us to make a deal happen and help a seller and help us as well. So thank you for sharing those things.
Sure.
And
My
just
pleasure.
different techniques and in your book. But tell the listeners how they can get in touch with you and learn more about you and your book.
All right. It's BroadwellPropertyGroup.com. That's our website. If you want to talk to us about investing or doing business with us, BroadwellPropertyGroup.com. And email is bill@gobroadwell. So you can just email me at bill@gobroadwell.com. And those are the 2 best ways to get in touch with me. If you got any questions, love to answer them. If you want to do business with us, send us an email. We'd love to talk to you.
Well, thank you very much.
Cool. Excellent, man. Good deal.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Syndication Show, brought to you by LifeBridge Capital. LifeBridge Capital works with investors nationwide to invest in real estate, while also donating 50% of its profits to assist parents who are committing to adoption. LifeBridge Capital, making a difference, one investor and one child at a time. Connect online at www.lifebridgecapital.com for free material and videos to further your success.